I just wanted to walk you through kind of the steps of this, this virtual currency money laundering scheme, so that since we just went through the topics, show you in real world kind of how it works. So on your screen, you can see there's the victim virtual currency exchange. So the exchange that was hacked, and they moved those funds into an unhosted wallet. Now, an unhosted wallet, this is a kind of a new term you might not be familiar with. If it's a hosted wallet, that means that there is a third party that actually holds the funds or the virtual funds, and until the consumer decides to tell them to transact on their behalf. All right, so that's hosted. Unhosted is when the user themselves, they have complete independent control of the funds, so they can use the funds in that wallet to buy and sell different types of currencies, and there isn't a whole lot of controls or touch point with that third party at all. So the next step, so they moved it into that wallet, and then they went to the dark market, and that's where that Alpha Bay I mentioned earlier, they took the funds out of that wallet and set up a bunch of accounts on the dark market. And basically this is part of that layering process where they spread it up into all of these various accounts. Again, this is on the dark market, and and a lot of these were pass-through accounts where basically they put it in multiple transactions into these accounts, and they gradually deposit it over time on the dark market here. So this was kind of that withdraw and layering process. And then once they got it into the dark market, that's where they moved it onto another currency exchange. Okay, so from the dark market, then they went and they purchased additional virtual currency out of those market accounts. And they went to a single virtual currency exchange. And that's where they went in through a process called chain hopping. Now, you may hear that term. Chain hopping is, it's similar to traditional money laundering, where they're bouncing between different accounts or different types of currency. Remember, all of these transactions, there's a digital ledger that tracks when the money comes in and out and the values and the exchanges. And so in order to make that confusing, the money launderer will go through and buy and sell different virtual currencies and hop through different chains, chain hopping. So that way it's confusing. Okay, this transaction went here and then it's over here. And you can see on your page, they set up 6 accounts. Now, the interesting thing here is that these accounts, there were some similarities that the government was able to pick up on. First off, they were similarly styled emails. So the email accounts that set up these virtual currency accounts, they were all from the same Indian email service provider. All right, so they were set up, they were very similar, same email provider. They were accessed from the same IP address. So then they were able to further show that, okay, it was one individual that had all of these email accounts. They were all created around the same time. So these email accounts popped up around the same time. And they all engaged in that same chain hopping type of activity where they were moving funds back and forth between virtual currencies. And what the other curious thing is, a lot of these accounts, what they were finding is they were shut down as soon as the virtual currency exchange tried to get some KYC information or know your customer data. Suddenly that account was abandoned. All right. So the next step is they actually started moving through other currency exchanges. And they engaged in another term that you might hear and might want to be aware of. It's called a appeal chain. And that's where a large amount of funds are deposited into a certain account, and then a slightly less amount of those funds were dropped into the next account and then into the next account. And so it was less suspicious, right? Because if you have an account and all of the money comes in and then all of the money goes out immediately, that's suspicious, right? That's something that your system is probably looking for. I've got $5,000 in and then the same day, $5,000 out. Well, to kind of make that a little more difficult to raise a red flag, they have multiple accounts where they're transacting, and it's slightly less every time that the money comes out. And so they go through this chain of accounts, leaving some funds in there so it doesn't look like it's just closing out afterwards. And then oftentimes those funds would be put into what's called a cluster, or it's either an account or maybe a group of accounts. Where it looks like all the funds are kind of combined again, so they can help keep track of it. Remember, we're going through this layering process, and so again, it's trying to confuse the source of those funds. Now, how did they access some of these funds, or were they transacting it? They were using those Bitcoin ATMs that we mentioned, And that was one way that they could connect it to the individuals who were responsible, because they may not have been able to track through the accounts, but the individual accessing the ATM to conduct them, that's where they could find some information connected to the actual individuals. And then they were also purchasing what's called non-fungible tokens. Now, a non-fungible token is a virtual currency, or it's a virtual asset that represents something specific. So there's some real world asset that token represents. And oftentimes in money laundering, it tends to be like a work of art or something along those lines. Like there's this piece of art that's out in Europe that it's not hanging on my wall, but I've got this virtual token that says it's mine. And so by exchanging those virtual tokens, they're also able to hide where these funds are coming from and who's doing what. Now, they also accessed the funds by purchasing gift cards, using certain apps or certain gaming platforms in order to take that value out and then exchange it. And there's some examples there from this case where it was the Walmart app, an Uber account, hotels.com, PlayStation, and that's where they could take these emails and track them back to the individuals who are actually responsible for all of this. So again, like you can see, what was very interesting about this is some of the shell companies. If you'd like to do some more of the research, the shell companies involved, they had a company that they called SalesFolk that they used to set up and had banking accounts and had some of these virtual accounts. But the transactions didn't make sense. If you dug into it, you saw that the SalesFolk it was buying and selling and purchasing services from other shell companies for things like there was $130,000 payment that came through for advertising services. But if you followed up and you looked at the company that they were working with, it was a company out of Hong Kong, and you go to their website and they didn't have one. So what kind of advertising company doesn't even have a website? So there were certain things in the process, if you really dug into it and started asking questions, that didn't make sense. That SalesFolk company that they claimed to be trading on behalf of their clients, trading in virtual currency. However, you went to that SalesFolk website and there was nothing that said that they were trading virtual currency on behalf of their customers. So, I mean, there's some of these things that just didn't make sense when you asked them questions. When you went and actually verified their responses, the responses didn't make sense. So I'd encourage you, if you really want to dig into what exactly happened here, they have a great write-up. Again, we don't have time to go through everything on this, but keep in mind that these were some young people who were participating in a relatively sophisticated scheme here, and trying to figure out, okay, what are the touch points? Because remember, you don't need to catch them red-handed as a financial institution. The trick here is to gather enough information that maybe as a part of another investigation, you can assist them in catching some of these people. You may not be able to piece together the entire workup of their money laundering scheme from your desk or from your financial institution, but what you can do is gather bits of information and hold on to them in your customer risk profile to assist in that type of investigation should it ever come up. Or maybe you get enough where you're going to file a SAR and report something that, look, this just doesn't make sense.